I don't think there was ever a moment where we decided we were serious. It just happened. We started talking because it was easy. That's what I remember most. It didn't feel like effort. I didn't rehearse texts. I didn't wait 3 hours to respond. I just answered when I saw her name light up. She did the same. At least I think she did. It felt mutual. That's important. I need to believe it was mutual. In the beginning, she used to call me on her drive home. Not every day, but enough that I started expecting it. I'd hear my phone buzz around 5:40 and already know it was her, before I even looked. We'd talk about small things. Her coworker who microwaved fish in the office. The song that got stuck in her head. The way traffic always slowed near the same exit. Nothing important. That's what made it feel important. I think that's when I first felt safe with her. Not during some big romantic moment. Just in the middle of her complaining about traffic while I sat on my couch listening. There's something about being included in someone's ordinary life that makes you feel chosen. She used to ask me about my day too. Not in a polite way. In a curious way. Like she actually wanted the details. She'd stop me if I skipped over something. Wait, what did he say after that? She'd ask, laughing. I remember thinking, this is what it's supposed to feel like. Not fireworks. Not obsession. Just two people paying attention. We didn't rush anything. We weren't dramatic. We didn't fight about dumb things. At least not at first. We were steady. I don't know when steady turned into something else. That's the part one keeps circling back to. Because if there had been a fight, I could point to it. If she had yelled, or I had said something unforgivable, I could say, that's when it broke. But there wasn't anything like that. It was more like, the noticing stopped. At least on her side. I still noticed everything. I noticed when she stopped calling on her drive home. The first time it happened, I told myself she was just busy. The second time, I thought maybe she was tired. By the third week, I had already adjusted my expectations so quietly that I didn't even admit I was adjusting them. I started texting instead. Just small things. How was work? Did you survive traffic? She'd respond. Eventually. Shorter than before. But I told myself that was normal. People get comfortable. They don't need to say as much. That's healthy, right? I remember one night we were sitting on her couch, watching a show neither of us was really paying attention to. In the beginning, we used to pause constantly to talk. We'd rewind scenes because one of us missed something while telling a story. That night, we didn't pause once. We just watched. It felt calm, but not connected. I didn't say anything. I think that's when I started trying harder without calling it that. I'd ask more questions. I'd bring up old inside jokes to see if they still landed. Sometimes they did. Sometimes she smiled like she was being polite. And that's a small thing, but you can feel the difference between someone laughing with you and someone laughing because they know they're supposed to. I don't want to make her sound cold. She wasn't. She was still kind. She still said goodnight. She still held my hand in public. That's what makes it harder to explain. Nothing obvious disappeared. The shape of the relationship stayed the same. It just felt hollow in places I couldn't describe. I started noticing how often I was the one reaching first. Not in a dramatic way, just small things. I'd be the one to suggest dinner. I'd be the one to say, we haven't talked much today. I'd be the one to send the random photo of something that reminded me of her. She'd respond warmly. She always did. But she stopped initiating those things on her own. At first I thought I was imagining it. I even tested it once. I didn't text her for a full day. Not to punish her. Just to see. She didn't text either. I remember staring at my phone that night feeling ridiculous. Like I was playing a game she didn't even know we were playing. The next morning she sent, sorry, yesterday was crazy. And I believed her. Because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt until there's nothing left to give. I don't think she meant to pull away. That's the thing. I don't think there was a conscious decision. I think she just stopped noticing us. And I kept noticing everything. I noticed how she'd scroll her phone while I was talking. Not always, but enough that I started shortening my stories. I'd catch myself wrapping up faster, just in case she lost interest. That's such a small adjustment. But when you realize you're editing yourself in real time, it stays with you. There was a night I remember clearly. We were at a friend's birthday dinner. Everyone was loud. She was laughing, leaning across the table, fully engaged in a conversation with someone else. I watched her for a second longer than I should have. I wasn't jealous. I just realized I hadn't seen that kind of energy directed at me in a while. And I hated myself for thinking that. Because she was allowed to laugh with other people. She wasn't doing anything wrong. But I missed being the place her energy landed first. I tried to talk to her about it once. Not directly. I didn't say, "You're drifting away." I said something softer. "Do you ever feel like we've just gotten quieter?" She looked confused. Quieter how? And I didn't know how to answer. Because technically, nothing was wrong. We still saw each other. We still said, "I love you." We still made plans for the future in a casual way. Trips we might take. Shows we might watch. But it felt like I was the only one checking the temperature of the room. The only one asking, "Are we okay?" She'd say yes. And I'd nod. But I wasn't asking about conflict. I was asking about presence. There's a difference. I started thinking maybe this was just what long-term relationships feel like. Maybe the early curiosity naturally fades. Maybe you don't keep asking questions because you think you already know the answers. But I didn't feel like I knew her less. I felt like she was knowing me less. Or maybe not knowing me less. Just caring less about knowing more. That sounds harsher than I mean it to. It wasn't indifference. It was comfort. The kind that slides quietly into taking someone for granted. I don't think she meant to do that. And I don't think I meant to let it happen either. I just kept trying to notice us. I'd suggest we go somewhere new. Try something different. Not because I needed excitement. Just because I wanted to feel like we were still discovering things together. Sometimes she'd agree. Sometimes she'd say she was tired. And eventually, I stopped suggesting as much. Not all at once. Just gradually. There was a moment, I don't know why this one sticks with me, where I realized she had started telling someone else things first. Not big things. Just small ones. I found out about a work story from her Instagram caption before she mentioned it to me. I saw a photo of her at lunch with a coworker and read about how today was exactly what I needed. I hadn't heard about her day yet. That's when it hit me. I wasn't her first call anymore. Not literally. She hadn't been calling much anyway. But I wasn't the first place her thoughts went. And I know that sounds possessive. I've gone back and forth on that. Am I expecting too much? Is it unfair to want to be the person someone instinctively shares with? Maybe. But in the beginning, that's what we were. She used to say, "I can't wait to tell you something." I can't remember the last time she said that. I stayed. That's the part one don't judge myself for anymore. I stayed because nothing was bad enough to leave. We weren't fighting. We weren't unhappy in a loud way. We were just less. And less is harder to walk away from than pain. Pain gives you clarity. Less gives you doubt. I kept thinking, maybe it's a phase. Maybe she's stressed. Maybe I'm overthinking. I've always been the one who overthinks. But I wasn't imagining the quiet. I started feeling alone next to her. That's the strangest kind of loneliness. When the person you're closest to feels slightly out of reach. She still reached for my hand in public. But she didn't reach for my thoughts the way she used to. There was one night we were lying in bed. The room was dark. She was already half asleep. I wanted to say something. Not a complaint. Just a question. "Do you still feel the same?" I almost asked. But I didn't. Because I was afraid of the pause before the answer. So I rolled over and told myself I was being dramatic. I think that's when I realized I was the only one still trying to notice us. I was measuring changes. Tracking tone shifts. Counting who texted first. Remembering old versions of conversations and comparing them to new ones. She was just living. And maybe that's the real difference. She felt secure enough not to monitor anything. I felt uncertain enough to monitor everything. Eventually, it became exhausting. Not the relationship itself. The awareness. I didn't want to be the only one checking if we were still okay. And one day, I just stopped. I stopped asking subtle questions. I stopped suggesting new plans. I stopped trying to recreate the early curiosity. I matched her energy. Not out of spite. Just to see what would happen. Nothing dramatic happened. We became quieter. More polite. More independent. It almost looked healthy from the outside. But inside, I felt like something was slowly fading and neither of us was naming it. The ending wasn't an argument. It was a conversation on her couch, calm and soft. She said she felt like we had grown in different directions. I nodded, because I had felt that too. We didn't cry much. We hugged. We said we cared about each other. And we meant it. That's what makes it heavy. There was no villain. No betrayal. Just a slow shift neither of us corrected. Afterward, I kept replaying everything. Looking for the exact moment it changed. I still do sometimes. Was it when the calls stopped? When the questions got shorter? When I started editing myself mid-sentence? Or was it more gradual than that? Maybe there was no single moment. Maybe relationships don't break. Maybe they just stop being noticed by both people at the same time. And if only one person keeps noticing, eventually they get tired. I don't hate her. I don't even think she did anything wrong. I just think I was the only one still trying to notice us. And at some point, I didn't know how to keep doing that alone. Sometimes I wonder if she ever felt the shift the way I did. If she ever lay awake and thought, we're not the same. Or if, for her, it simply felt natural. I don't know. I never asked. And now it feels too late to ask. I still catch myself wanting to tell her small things. Something funny that happened at work. A song she would have liked. Then I remember. She's not the first person I think of anymore either. That realization feels quieter than I expected. Not bitter. Just still. I guess that's what's left. Not anger. Not regret. Just the understanding that I tried to keep noticing us. And eventually, I had to stop. And I'm still not sure exactly when that happened. I just know it did. It's strange what your mind holds on to. Not the big dates. Not the anniversaries or the trips we talked about taking and never did. It's the smaller things. Like the way she used to say my name when she picked up the phone. Not dramatically. Just softly. Almost like she was confirming I was really there. I didn't notice when she stopped doing that. Or maybe she didn't stop. Maybe I just stopped hearing it the same way. I go back and forth on that a lot. After we ended, I told people it was mutual. That we both felt it shifting. That we both agreed it wasn't what it used to be. That's mostly true. But if I'm being honest, I felt it first. Or at least I felt it more. There's a difference between knowing something is changing and feeling responsible for trying to fix it. I carried that responsibility quietly. I don't even think she knew I was carrying it. I'd rehearse small conversations in my head. Not confrontations. Just gentle check-ins. Do you ever feel like we're not as curious about each other anymore? That's when I practiced a lot. But every time I imagined saying it, it sounded dramatic. Like I was accusing her of something she didn't consciously do. So I didn't say it. Instead, I adjusted. I became more accommodating. I gave her more space. I try not to take the shorter replies personally. I reminded myself that real life is tiring, that adults don't have endless emotional energy. And that's true. I still believe that. But I also think there's a difference between being tired and being done. And sometimes those two look identical from the outside. There was a week near the end when we barely talked. Not intentionally. Just days filled up. She had work stuff. I had my own deadlines. We sent a few practical texts. Running late. Talk tomorrow. Things like that. At one point I caught myself thinking, if we broke up right now, would anything actually change in my daily routine? That thought scared me. Not because I wanted to leave, but because I realized the emotional absence had already settled in. We were technically together, but I was already preparing myself for the idea of not being. And that's a lonely place to sit. I remember driving one evening, listening to a song she showed me months earlier. It came on shuffle. I didn't skip it. I tried to feel what I felt the first time we heard it together. I couldn't. Not because I didn't care, but because it didn't feel like ours anymore. It just felt like a song. And that hit me harder than I expected. I think I kept hoping for a moment where something would jolt us back. A weekend away. A long conversation. Some unexpected reconnection. But reconnection requires two people reaching at the same time. And I was the only one stretching. At least that's how it felt. I want to be careful here. I don't want to rewrite history in a way that makes me the hero and her the one who drifted. I'm sure I changed too. I probably grew quieter in my own ways. More cautious. More guarded once I sensed the shift. It's possible she felt me pulling back and responded to that. Sometimes I wonder if she was thinking, he's not as open as he used to be. And maybe she was right. Because when you start feeling like you're the only one noticing something slipping, you protect yourself. You talk less about the things that matter most. You test the waters before you dive in. You wait to see if they'll meet you halfway. And when they don't, you pretend you didn't step forward at all. That's the part one don't like admitting. I wasn't just trying to save us. I was also slowly bracing for the end. There was a morning I woke up before her. The room was quiet. Light coming in through the blinds. I looked at her and tried to remember the first time I felt sure about us. I couldn't find that exact memory. Not because it wasn't real, but because it had blurred into everything that came after. I used to feel something solid when I looked at her. Not intense, just grounded. That morning, I felt uncertain. Not about her as a person, about us as a shared space. It felt like standing in a house that still looks the same, but doesn't feel like home anymore. And I hated that thought, because she hadn't done anything cruel. She hadn't betrayed me. She just stopped reaching in the same direction I was reaching. And I didn't know how to ask her to reach without making it sound like a demand. When we finally had the conversation that ended things, it was almost too calm. She said she felt like something had shifted for a while. I asked her when. She shrugged a little and said she wasn't sure. That answer hurt more than a specific date would have, because it meant the drift had been happening quietly for both of us. I asked her if she still loved me. She said she cared about me deeply. I didn't push further. I knew what that meant. We talked about how we'd grown, how we wanted slightly different things, how timing can be strange. All the phrases people use when there isn't a dramatic story to tell. When I left her place that night, I didn't feel shattered. I felt hollow, like I had spent months holding something fragile and finally put it down. And my hands were still shaped like they were holding it. The days after were quiet. Too quiet. I kept expecting my phone to light up with her name out of habit. It didn't. And that silence felt honest in a way our last few months hadn't. That's hard to say, but it's true. There's something clarifying about the end. When it's over, you stop monitoring. You stop counting who reached first. You stop wondering if tonight will feel different. It's just done. And in a strange way, that's easier than the slow fading. Sometimes I think about how subtle it all was. If someone had filmed us during those last months, they wouldn't see anything wrong. Two people sitting on a couch. Two people making dinner. Two people going to bed at the same time. It would look normal. But inside, I was constantly asking, are we still here? And I don't think she was asking that at all. Maybe that's the simplest way to explain it. I was still trying to notice us. She had already stopped checking. I don't blame her for that. Not anymore. We all relax in places that feel stable. Maybe she thought we were stable. Maybe I was the one who needed more reassurance than I admitted. I've had to sit with that possibility. That maybe the shift wasn't just her losing interest. Maybe it was me becoming more aware of small absences, more sensitive to what wasn't being said. But even if that's true, the feeling was real. Feeling like you're the only one still paying attention to the temperature in the room changes how you stand in it. You move carefully. You speak softer. You try not to make sudden gestures. And eventually, you realize you're not relaxed anymore. I don't think love always ends with anger. Sometimes it ends with asymmetry. One person still leaning forward, the other already sitting back. And no one announces when the posture changes. I still think about her sometimes when something small happens. A joke she would have appreciated. A restaurant she mentioned wanting to try. For a split second, my mind still moves toward her. Then it corrects itself. Not sharply, just gently. Like adjusting your balance after stepping somewhere uneven. I don't regret loving her. I don't regret trying. If anything, I regret not saying out loud what I was feeling sooner. Not in a confrontational way. Just honestly. I feel like I'm the only one still trying to notice us. Maybe she would have disagreed. Maybe she would have stepped closer. Or maybe it would have ended sooner. I'll never know. What I do know is that the quiet shift changed me. I'm more aware now. Maybe too aware. I catch myself monitoring new connections the way I monitored ours. Listening for tone changes. Watching for curiosity. Part of me is afraid of being the only one noticing again. But part of me also understands that noticing isn't the problem. Carrying it alone is. Sometimes late at night, when everything is still, I replay small scenes. Her laughing in the kitchen. Her hand finding mine without looking. The early phone calls during traffic. I don't feel pain when I remember those. Just distance. Like looking at photos from a place you used to live. You remember the layout. You just don't belong there anymore. I think that's what this really was. Not a collapse. Not a failure. Just a slow movement away from each other that neither of us stopped. And I happened to be the one who felt it happening. Or at least, I felt it first. I'm still not completely sure. And maybe that's okay. I don't need a clean explanation anymore. I just know that for a while, I was the only one still trying to notice us. And eventually, I let myself stop. Not because I didn't care, but because I couldn't keep noticing alone. And that's where it ended. Quietly. Without a scene. Without a villain. Just with less. And then nothing. Sometimes I try to remember the last time it felt easy. Not the last time we didn't fight. We didn't really fight. I mean the last time it felt simple. Like when I would walk into the apartment and feel that small lift in my chest because she was there. Not because something was happening. Just because she existed in the same space as me. I don't know when that lift stopped happening. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't drop off a cliff. It just thinned out. Like a sound fading in the background until you don't notice it's gone. I used to notice us. That's what keeps circling back. I noticed the way she'd tuck her feet under my leg on the couch. I noticed when she switched shampoos. I noticed when she laughed differently around other people. I noticed when she was tired but pretending not to be. I paid attention in small ways. And somewhere along the line, I realized I was the only one still doing that. Or at least it felt that way. I don't know if that's fully fair. Maybe she was noticing things too. Just different things. Things I couldn't see. That thought has crossed my mind more than once. I don't want to rewrite history in a way that makes me the only one who cared. That's too clean. Too convenient. But I do remember the moment something shifted inside me. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even a bad day. We were sitting at the kitchen table. It was late. She was on her phone. I was telling her about something small from work. Nothing important. Just a story about someone misplacing a file and how it turned into this long, unnecessary email chain. I was halfway through it when I realized she hadn't reacted once. Not a smile. Not a question. Not even a small wow. She was nodding. Technically. But she wasn't there. And I stopped mid-sentence. She didn't notice I stopped. That's the part that still sits heavy. If someone stops talking and you don't realize it, what does that mean? I waited a few seconds. I don't know why. Maybe I thought she'd look up. Maybe I wanted to test it. She didn't. And I remember thinking, very quietly, almost calmly, oh, it wasn't anger. It wasn't heartbreak. It was recognition. Like I had been slowly turning down the volume on something and finally realized the room was quiet. I finished the story anyway. I don't even remember how it ended. I just kept talking because it felt more embarrassing to call attention to the silence than to pretend it hadn't happened. After that night, I started noticing different things. Noticing what she didn't notice. When I got a haircut and she didn't mention it. When I rearranged the living room slightly and she didn't look up. When I started coming home later and she didn't ask why. I told myself that was normal. People get comfortable. Comfort isn't a crime. I repeated that to myself a lot. Comfort isn't a crime. But there's a difference between comfort and absence. I just couldn't decide which one we were in. I tried, in small ways, to bring us back into focus. I'd ask her questions that didn't require short answers. How are you feeling about everything lately? That was one I asked more than once. She'd say, I'm good. Just tired. And maybe she was. Life does that. It makes you tired. But I kept hoping she'd turn the question back to me. Sometimes she did. Briefly. Why? And I'd say, I don't know. Just thinking. Which wasn't fully honest. I was thinking about us. All the time. I don't know when I started monitoring the relationship like it was something fragile. Like if I didn't keep checking the temperature, it would freeze over completely. I'd replay conversations in my head. Analyze tone. Count how many times she reached for my hand versus how many times I reached for hers. That sounds obsessive when I say it out loud. Maybe it was. But it didn't feel dramatic at the time. It felt like maintenance. Like tightening screws before something falls apart. The problem was, she didn't seem to think anything was loose. There's a kind of loneliness that comes from being misunderstood. But there's a deeper kind that comes from not even being misunderstood. From not being examined at all. I think that's what started to wear me down. It wasn't rejection. It was neutrality. If she had pushed back, argued, said, you're overthinking this, at least that would have meant she was engaged with the idea of us. Instead, everything just flattened. We became efficient. We handled bills, groceries, schedules, family visits. We operated smoothly. People probably thought we were stable. Maybe we were. But stability without curiosity feels different. I missed being asked things. Not big, dramatic questions. Just small ones. What are you thinking about? Why did you get quiet? Did that bother you? I started answering those questions in my own head because no one else was asking them. And over time, something subtle happened. I stopped bringing things up. Not intentionally. Just gradually. If I felt hurt, I'd wait. If I felt distant, I'd wait. If I felt unsure, I'd tell myself it would pass. Because every time I tried to gently open the door to those conversations, it felt like she stepped around it. Not dismissive. Not cruel. Just uninterested. And that word feels harsh. Uninterested. I don't even know if that's true. Maybe she trusted us so completely that she didn't feel the need to analyze. Maybe she felt safe. Maybe she assumed I did too. That possibility hurts in a different way. Because if she felt secure and I felt invisible, then neither of us were wrong. We were just out of sync. I think the hardest part is that nothing catastrophic happened. There's no single memory I can point to and say, that's when we broke. We didn't break. We thinned. We faded. And I stayed. Longer than I probably should have. Not because I was afraid to leave, but because I kept thinking I could notice us back into existence. If I paid enough attention. If I asked the right question. If I adjusted my tone. If I showed up more gently. More clearly. More consistently. Maybe she'd meet me there. Sometimes she did, briefly. We'd have a good night. Laugh at something stupid. Cook together like we used to. and I'd feel that old lift again. Just a flicker. Enough to convince me I wasn't imagining everything. Enough to reset the clock in my head. See, we're still here. But the flickers got shorter, and the in-between stretches got longer. I don't remember the exact day I realized I was tired. Not tired of her. Just tired of being the only one scanning the horizon for changes. Tired of being the emotional historian. Remembering who we used to be. Because that's another thing. She didn't talk about the past much. I did. I'd say, remember when we used to? And she'd smile. But it was polite. Not nostalgic. That difference is small. But it's real. Eventually, I stopped saying it. Stopped reaching back. Stopped reaching forward, too. And that's when something inside me shifted again. When I realized I wasn't just the only one trying to notice us. I was also the only one trying to save the version of us I remembered. And maybe that version had already moved on. Or maybe it had simply evolved into something quieter, steadier. I still don't fully know. What I do know is that one night, lying in bed beside her, listening to her breathing, I felt calm in a way that scared me. Not content. Not relieved. Just calm. Like the internal debate had ended without telling me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel urgency. I just felt finished trying. And that realization didn't explode. It settled. Softly. I stared at the ceiling for a long time, thinking about all the small efforts I'd made, all the tiny emotional adjustments, all the times I convinced myself things were normal, and I asked myself a question I had avoided for months. What if nothing is wrong? What if this is just what we are now? And if this is what we are, can I live here? I didn't answer right away. I just lay there, listening to her breathe, noticing us one more time. Even then, especially then, because that's what I had always done. I noticed, and for the first time, I wondered what it would feel like to stop, to not track the distance, to not measure the warmth, to not analyze the silence, just to exist inside whatever this was. I don't know if that would have saved us or erased us faster. I never really found out, because after that night, something in me went quiet. Not dramatic, not cold, just quieter. And she didn't notice. Or maybe she did. I still don't know which possibility hurts more. I stopped asking the bigger questions, stopped waiting for the deeper answers. We kept functioning. From the outside, nothing changed. But inside, I wasn't leaning in anymore. I wasn't bracing either. I was just there. And eventually, being just there felt heavier than trying ever did. That's when I understood something I hadn't let myself admit before. It's not exhausting to love someone. It's exhausting to love someone and feel like the only witness to it. I don't say that with bitterness. I say it like someone describing the weather. It just became true. And once it became true, I couldn't unknow it. We didn't end in a storm. We ended in a conversation that sounded almost logistical, like two people adjusting plans. There were tears, but even the tears felt tired. I remember looking at her and thinking how familiar her face was. How many times I had studied it, searching for signs, and realizing I didn't need to search anymore. There was nothing left to interpret. Afterward, people asked what happened. I never had a clean answer. Nothing happened. That's the problem. Nothing happened for a long time. And I was the only one who kept noticing the nothing. Sometimes I still replay those months, wondering if I imagined parts of it. If I demanded too much attention, too much reflection, too much emotional mirroring. Maybe she loved in a steadier way. Maybe I loved in a more observant way. Neither is wrong. They just don't always line up. I don't hate her. I don't even regret us. I just think we slowly became two people living beside each other instead of inside something together. And I was the only one trying to keep that something visible. These days, I don't analyze it as much. Or maybe I do, just more quietly. Sometimes I catch myself noticing small things about strangers. The way someone laughs. The way someone pauses before answering. And I wonder if I'll ever stop being the person who tracks emotional shifts like weather patterns. I don't think that's a flaw. But I know now that I need someone who notices back. Not perfectly. Not constantly. Just sometimes. Someone who stops mid-sentence when I do. Someone who hears the silence. I don't have a big conclusion. I don't have a lesson. I just know that for a long time, I was the only one still trying to notice us. And then one day, I stopped. And the world didn't shake. It just kept going. And so did I.